Once upon a time, in a quiet little town wrapped between rolling green hills and winding rivers, lived a man named Elias Carter. He was 40 years old, weary of the world, and carried the look of someone who had wrestled with life and lost more than he'd ever won. His small apartment overlooked the rusting tracks of an abandoned railway line, a place where trains no longer ran and dreams no longer arrived. Every morning, Elias followed the same routine. He'd wake up before sunrise, boil a pot of weak coffee, and stare at the peeling wallpaper as if it held the answers to his unspoken questions. He'd then dress in his worn-out jacket, step into the foggy streets, and walk to the old repair shop where he worked, fixing clocks, radios, and broken watches that people barely used anymore. The shop was dusty, filled with ticking sounds from clocks that still worked and silence from those that never would. It was in many ways a reflection of Elias's own heart, part alive, part forgotten. Years ago, Elias had been a dreamer. He had studied engineering, full of hope and energy. But when his father fell ill, Elias gave up his career to take care of him. The years passed, his savings vanished, and when his father finally passed away, Elias found himself left with nothing but a small room, a few tools, and a loneliness that echoed louder than any clock in his shop. People in the town respected him but barely noticed him. He was polite, humble, and invisible, the kind of man who was always there but never seen. One cold November morning, as Elias walked to work, the sky hung low with gray clouds. A soft drizzle had begun to fall, and the streets glistened with reflections of lamps and puddles. As he crossed the bridge near the market, he saw a young boy, maybe 10 years old, standing barefoot by a food stall. The boy's clothes were torn, his face smudged with dirt, and his eyes were fixed hungrily on the steaming loaves of bread displayed on the counter. Elias stopped. The boy looked up, startled, as if expecting to be scolded. But Elias didn't say a word. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the few coins he had, and bought 2 loaves. Without hesitation, he handed one to the boy. The boy blinked, confused. "For me?" he whispered. "Yes," Elias said softly. "Eat while it's warm." The boy grabbed the bread, holding it as though it were gold. "Thank you, sir," he said with tears in his eyes before running off toward the narrow alleyway behind the market. Elias watched him disappear, smiled faintly, and then continued walking to his shop. He didn't think much of it. It was a small gesture, something any decent person would do. But that one act of kindness would ripple through time in ways he could never imagine. Time, as Elias knew too well, moved like clockwork, steady, unfeeling, and relentless. The seasons came and went. The town changed slowly. New stores opened while old ones closed. Elias grew older, his hair grayer, his hands rougher from years of repair work. His health began to decline. He coughed often, felt dizzy sometimes, and the doctor warned him about overwork and poor diet. But Elias had no choice. He had no family, no one to care for him. One evening, a storm rolled through the town. The wind howled like a wounded animal, and rain lashed against the rooftops. Elias stayed late at the shop, trying to finish repairing a customer's antique clock. As he stepped out, the street was nearly deserted. The power lines flickered. Halfway across the bridge, Elias felt a sudden pain in his chest. The world spun, his vision blurred, and before he could call for help, he collapsed beside the railing, unconscious, soaked by the relentless rain. When Elias opened his eyes, everything was blurry. He was lying in a clean white bed. The faint smell of disinfectant filled the air, and a beeping machine beside him marked the rhythm of his heartbeat. A nurse noticed he was awake and called someone. Moments later, a tall young man in a white coat entered the room. His face looked kind but unfamiliar. "Mr. Carter," the man said, smiling warmly. "You're safe now. You had a heart attack on the bridge, but you were brought here just in time." Elias frowned weakly. Who found me?" he asked. The young doctor hesitated, then said softly, "I did." Elias blinked, trying to recall. "You?" The man nodded. "Yes. I was driving home when I saw you lying there. Something made me stop. I carried you to my car and brought you here myself." Elias looked at him with gratitude. "Thank you. You saved my life." The doctor smiled gently. Actually, he said, you saved mine first. Elias frowned. I don't understand. The doctor pulled a chair beside the bed and sat down. His eyes softened as he began to tell his story. Many years ago, the doctor began, I was a poor street boy in this very town. I used to beg near the market, hungry and cold most days. One day, a kind man, a stranger, bought me a loaf of bread. I remember it was raining, and I hadn't eaten for 2 days. That bread kept me alive that night. Elias's breath caught in his throat. His eyes widened. The doctor continued, his voice trembling slightly. That one act of kindness changed everything for me. I promised myself that someday I'd grow up and help others the same way that man helped me. I didn't know his name. I only remembered his tired eyes, and the gentle way he said, eat while it's warm. Elias's lips trembled. That was me. The doctor smiled, eyes shining. Yes, and now, all these years later, I finally got to return that kindness. Tears welled up in Elias's eyes. He couldn't speak. The years of loneliness, the quiet suffering, the feeling that his life had meant so little, all of it melted away in that single moment. The young doctor placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You see, Mr. Carter, no act of kindness is ever wasted. What you gave that day wasn't just bread. It was hope. And hope finds its way back. Elias stayed in the hospital for several weeks. The young doctor, whose name was Dr. Samuel Reyes, visited him every day. They would talk for hours and about life, dreams, and how strange fate could be. Dr. Samuel arranged for Elias to move into a small cottage near the edge of town once he recovered. A quiet place surrounded by trees and sunlight. You'll need peace and good food, he said, and I'll make sure you have both. For the first time in years, Elias felt cared for. Every morning he'd sit by the window of his new home, sipping tea as the sunrise painted the sky gold. Sometimes, Samuel would drop by after work, bringing groceries or books. They became like father and son, bound not by blood, but by compassion. As the months passed, Elias's health improved. He began to smile again. He even reopened a small repair stall in the market, fixing watches and radios for free sometimes, saying, just pass on the kindness when you can. People began to notice him again, not as the lonely old clockmaker, but as the kind man whose hands could mend both time and hearts. Years went by. Elias grew frailer, but his spirit only grew stronger. His small acts of generosity spread through the town like sunlight through the fog. He fixed broken toys for children, repaired lamps for widows, and never asked for payment. And as if the universe kept score through kindness, blessings always found their way back to him. A basket of fruit left at his door, flowers from grateful neighbors, and smiles from strangers who'd heard his story. One day, as the evening sun bled into the horizon, Elias sat outside his cottage with Samuel. They watched the river below shimmer in gold. Elias spoke softly. You know, I used to think I'd wasted my life, that I'd never done anything that mattered. But now, I see it differently. A small kindness even once can live longer than we do. Samuel smiled, eyes moist. You changed my life, Elias. And through me, you've helped hundreds of others. Every life I save as a doctor, a piece of that belongs to you. Elias chuckled weakly. Then I guess I've done my part. The final clock one cold winter night, Elias passed away peacefully in his sleep. On his bedside table lay a small pocket watch, repaired, polished, and ticking perfectly. Inside, a note was folded carefully. Time may fade, but kindness does not. Elias Carter. When Dr. Samuel found it, he wept silently. He carried that watch with him every day afterward, a reminder of the man who had once saved his life with nothing but a loaf of bread and a gentle heart. Years later, Samuel opened a free clinic in the same town, naming it the Carter Center for Compassionate Care. A plaque at the entrance read, "Inspired by one act of kindness that changed a life," and many more after. Legacy of light generations past. The town grew busier, brighter. The old railway line was rebuilt into a park walkway. Children played where Elias once walked alone. The story of the clockmaker and the boy became a local legend, a tale told in schools, whispered in families, and shared by strangers who wanted to believe in goodness again. And though Elias Carter's name slowly faded from memory, his kindness did not. Somewhere, in the rhythm of footsteps, in the warmth of a helping hand, in every small act of compassion that rippled outward, a part of him lived on. Moral of the story: one act of kindness can outlive time itself. You never truly know how far a small gesture can reach, whose life it might touch, what pain it might ease, or what dream it might awaken. Kindness doesn't ask for reward. It plants seeds that may bloom long after we're gone, and sometimes the very life you save with a small act ends up saving yours. Epilogue. Once upon a time, a weary man gave a loaf of bread to a hungry boy. That boy grew up to become a healer, and that healer gave life back to the man who once gave him hope. In the grand tapestry of fate, the thread of kindness is never lost. It simply weaves its way back, again and again, completing the circle.